to 13. I've been telling you this now for months. Our topic has not changed. Paul is a dog with a bone here, and he's not letting you yank it out of his teeth. He is staying on this same topic, and he's building toward a confrontation, if you will. He's been slowly but surely working up to make them understand what is wrong and what is causing this issue of divisions. Why that is that they have assigned themselves to certain individuals. Remember the whole thing about the names. Each one has chosen a spiritual leader. They say, this is the man I follow. This is the guy that I'm attached to. This is my leader. And they are trying to make a contest, a comparison out of this between, and the three names, well actually four, the three big men was Paul, Peter, and Apollos. And then of course we had some, and we're still trying to figure out whether in this church there was a small remnant that actually got it right and said we follow Christ. Or I'm sorry to say what was more likely, considering the nature of this church, we probably have another group that's merely saying, oh, I'm above all that. I follow Christ, unlike the rest of you peons in what you do. And this is how they have this attitude. And Paul is slowly building up to show them what the attitude really means. And I'm going to warn you that this is not a section that reads in a way that you would expect most pastors to address their congregations. Paul is going to wax sarcastic in the extreme here. We're going to look at this. But he's trying to bring something home. As we said, the whole core problem and why Paul spends all four of the first chapters on this one issue is he's saying that the base problem that led to all the other problems really starts here. Now, I hope you gathered just how bad this church was. This is a unique place. Nothing quite like it. There's a line in here that to me is the most shocking statement in the New Testament. I want you to turn over here to 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and looking at verse 17. This is his assessment of them. In the following directives, I have no praise for you. I want you to understand. None. Have you ever heard of a church where there's not one good thing? Isn't that how we start anything where we're going to criticize someone? You know, you're a wonderful person. I didn't think you're kind, you're considerate. I can't say enough good about you. And what's my next word, of course? But. And then I'm going to launch. But I always start with a positive. And Paul says, I would love to start with a positive. But things are so bad here, I've got nothing good to say. Now here it is. I have no praise for you. For your meetings do more harm than good. Now, I want you to process that for a second. Is there a command that you can think of that says something about what Christians are supposed to do?
Love one another.
Love one another. Okay, that's the basis of our testimony, right?
Build each other up.
Build each other up. Now that tells you something. In order to do that, what do we have to do?
Not be selfish.
Now be selfish, okay, I'm going to get more basic. We have to actually spend some time together, don't we?
Oh.
We actually, if we're going to build one another up, we're going to show love, we actually have to get together. And is there a command that says, that would suggest that God would like us to get together on a regular basis? Forsake not. And here's Paul saying, I know that past, I know you're not supposed to, but in your case, quite frankly, I hate to bring this up, but if you could just stay home every time we have a meeting, the cause of Christ would be better off. Do you get that? Yes, there's a command, don't forsake gathering yourselves together, but I'm going to make an exception in your case. That's how bad this is. It isn't that Paul actually says that, but he's saying, frankly, the whole cause of Christ, the whole statement about what we are, our testimony would be better served if no one knew you were a Christian. That is harsh, isn't it?
Very harsh.
That's the slam he begins this whole thing with. He pushes it. And he's getting down to here is what's the core? What is the problem? Why is this so bad that I can't say a single good thing about you? And as we've said, the core of these divisions came down to a way of thinking. Remember that? It's how they approached life. They had missed a step. Romans talks about this. Romans chapter 12, if you will. And I want to look at verses 1 through 3. And this is a starting point. Therefore, he says, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. Now he's talking about, here's our conduct, our bodies. The way we live has to be seen as a sacrifice before God, pleasing in our conduct. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. There's the command. You've got to be different than the world. And how does that work? Transformed by the renewing of your mind. See that? It's how you think. Transformed in your thinking. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And here's he's saying this. Until you learn to think differently than the world, you can never assess what is worldly and what is not. You will buy into the world's lies. You will miss what God said until you will learn to process things in a different way than you used to. And this is Paul's confrontation here. You've missed something. You're not quite getting it right. Romans 1, setting our tone again, jumping over to Romans 1, starting in verse 18 here. He says this, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godless and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what has been known about God is plain to them because God made it plain to them. He says, there's enough starting point to understand some things here. But now we'll jump down to verses 21 and 22. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Here's how futile the thinking is. Here's the definition of futile thinking. Although they claimed to be wise. You can stop right. They became fools, but here it is. What is the world's thinking? What is the world's thinking? Always wanting to try to prove.
How wise.
How smart we are. How wise. Aren't we just the best there's ever been? I want you to, there's never been a generation that did not think they had arrived as the best humanity had ever offered.
And you extrapolate that into we know better than you God.
And that's where it goes. As we said, the thinking of the world messes up two critical areas. Human opinion, it elevates human opinion to a godly status, and two, it elevates human individuals and personalities to a godly status. It can't think clearly in those two categories. And those are the two areas they're saying that human opinion and human people become our heroes. Yes?
And you see that more and more with societies and cultures as a culture or society ages, that as they embrace more and more evil and come up with an explanation as to why they're so much more enlightened, why this is a good thing, what used to be considered evil or wrong or morally corrupt is now, obviously we've learned, we've been enlightened, and now we're embracing, there's an openness, to this, and that's a lot of what we're seeing with the transgender and all that kind of movement, is now we're just more enlightened and accepting and loving and caring, obviously, than those past.
Absolutely. And I was going to jump into that a little later, but I'll take that, the whole idea of woke right now. What do we mean by woke? This is the new phrase that's out there about people. Think about, what are they saying when they say woke?
Enlightened.
The rest of us are asleep.
Yeah, the rest of you, you've missed it. We're the enlightened ones. We're the ones that get it because basically, frankly, you're too stupid to understand what we understand. It is
Didn't that already
pride.
happen in the Great Awakening back in?
All these things that we look at. And here's what Paul is going to slam home now. He's been building to this confrontation for a while now. He's going to come at this and go, here's where your basic problem is. You say you're dividing over men. You're not dividing over men. You're dividing over your egos. I entitled this as Little Men, Big Egos. And I think you'll see why when I'm done here.
That's the small man complex.
Yeah. Small men, big egos. We can go that way if you like. Small men and big egos. And he's saying this, that what really is happening here is that you are finding a way to praise yourself. I want you to think about this. The men they choose. First off, we've made it very plain here. We've gone through this. Paul has been making it plain. We don't have any divisions. Peter, Apollos, and I, we don't have any divisions. We've never been trying to get followers to identify us as the better person of three. There's no competition. That's all in your minds, because he went through and said, in our minds, there's a very different attitude in our service. But what attitude is shown in these divisions? Let's take a couple of men. Let's say Paul. You're a Paul follower. Here you go. And here's the reason, because I get it. The rest of you, Paul, this guy, he's got an intellect. The guy's brilliant, obviously, and he's got an intellect that's pretty much above the average man. And he's got training. He's got a Greek degree. He's got a Hebrew degree. This guy is bright. And I know it's hard for most of you to follow, but for me, this guy just really is, I just sap into this. This guy, here's what thing. The reason I like Paul better than you is I'm smarter than you are. I get it, you don't, isn't that too bad?
And obviously God shows him like on the way, like stopped and not
Yeah.
like, hey.
Oh, but there's the flip side. You and your Paul guy, I'm a Peter follower. Yeah, I get Paul and his degrees and stuff, but God had to knock him flat before he would do anything he was supposed to do. Blinded him, had to take him in the desert for 3 years before he could get it. Peter, when Jesus called, and what did Peter do immediately? Peter followed.
Jumped out of the boat.
He jumped out of the boat to be with him. Peter's the guy. Anybody else pick up a sword and try to defend him against a few hundred guys? I don't think so. I didn't see Paul there. Here's my thing. I'm a Peter guy because I'm more moral than you are.
Peter's solid, man. He's a rock.
He's a rock. I have a more dedicated thing. You founded the church. Yeah. You have this intellectual thing, but me, it's because I love the Lord and I follow Peter. Because Peter loved the Lord.
Oh my goodness.
I'm building this up and I'm playing up, but I want you to understand that every one of these things they did was based on an identity that wasn't so much about the person they followed as saying, by this association, it makes me look better. Isn't that what we do? I mean, even on down to sports, right? Your team wins a championship and the city, we have bragging rights for a year. Bragging, yeah, we just whooped you in the Super Bowl. We? What number were you wearing? I didn't recognize you out there. We won that big game 7 in bat. How many baskets did you make in that final game? How much help were you yelling at the TV? Do you really think that inspired the team and got them going? Yes. Yeah, I'm sure you.
My wife doesn't think so.
Hey, without the fans, there wouldn't be any sports.
There's right, you have to be fans. But you see, and there's a home game advantage where the fans get loud and they do all these kind of things. But we have this identity, and then you have these fans that have had 9 favorite teams in the last 20 years. And isn't it interesting that all 9 teams happen to be the team that was winning at the moment.
Bills fans.
We
Like a fan blade.
have this attitude of association that builds us up. And we will find, and it's not about the team, it's not about the person, but it's all about the association that lifts us up. I just got to watch this. I don't know if you saw some of the film from the White House. Ex-President Barack Obama visited the White House. And I don't know if you saw, but this guy is adored. This guy has a style about him. He's a winning style. People love. Did you notice how little attention Biden got as the sitting president during that visit?
He was literally looking around the room.
Everybody wanted to be with Barack Obama because this lifts you. I'm tight with. I felt so bad. I'm not a fan, I admit, but to literally see Joe Biden reaching over and grabbing the guy's shoulder, going, "Can you at least acknowledge I'm in the room?" And the guy just kept talking to people around him, wouldn't even say a word.
Joe was like, "Have you seen my son?"
Oh gosh.
I just have another confession.
Oh,
Do we need to pause
I
there?
tell everybody that I go to your class.
We'll put a booth in the corner.
That'll be for Easter.
And I hope, and I want to put this up, it isn't that there isn't reason to have a certain respect, and we're going to talk about that for certain people and what they do, but it has to be for the content and quality of what they do. And I hope the reason you say is because I'm getting taught the scripture here.
Yes, absolutely.
And that has to be, and that's the focus we have to have, not because, oh, that guy is just a riot. No, it has to be an issue that puts a different light on this. I want to give you an example of this to drive this home and to show you this is not new, and it is certainly not just limited to Corinth. Now, this is from Numbers chapter 11. This is the time of Moses here in Numbers chapter 11. starting in verse 24 here.
Chapter 11?
Chapter 11 in Numbers, verse 24. You guys think you're there for a second? I want you to follow this. Here it is. So Moses went out and told the people. Now remember here, is there any doubt that Moses is the leader of Israel at this time?
No.
I mean, for 40 years, this guy is the leader in Israel. Nobody doubts that. And he's the guy getting the messages from God. Here it comes. So Moses went out and told the people what the Lord has said. And he brought together 70 of their elders and had them stand around the tent. And then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke with him. And he took of the Spirit that was on him and put the Spirit on the 70 elders. Now here you go. Suddenly, God is going to share this empowering with 70 other guys. Now, does that sound like a good thing to you?
Yeah.
You would think, let's have more people empowered by the Spirit who are leading here. So that sounds like a good thing. And he put the Spirit of the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested them, they prophesied, but they did not do so again. However, 2 men, whose names were Eldad and Medad, had remained in the camp, and they were listed among the elders, but did not go out to the tent, yet the Spirit rested on them. And they prophesied in the camp. Now here it is. Here's 2 guys, other than Moses, that didn't get the temporary. They're continuing to prophesy. There's nothing here to indicate that what they're saying is wrong and that they're not prophesying in the power of God. It seems to suggest that's exactly what they're doing. And here's a response. A young man ran and told Moses. So see, yet the rest of it. A young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Now, what do you think they were running to tell Moses for? Yeah, what do you think? You're the prophet. What do they think they're doing? They're not like the 70 where you brought them out there and God just for a time. These guys are continuing to prophesy as if they can speak for God. And Joshua, the son of Nun, who had been Moses' aide. Now take special note of that.
Personal assistant.
Personal assistant. I am the personal assistant of the leader of the entire nation. He's the number 1, and it makes me number 2. And number 2 is a lot higher than anybody else here in the camp. Just so you understand this. Name dropping. Yes. Oh, who do you work for? Oh, Moses. Yeah. I'm his top aide. Did I mention that before? Yes, every time you open your mouth, Joshua. We none of us have missed that. Here it comes.
None, no pun intended.
Yes. The son of Nun, who had been Moses' aide since youth, spoke up and said to Moses, "My Lord, stop him." If God is empowering them, why would Joshua want them to stop?
I'm worried about losing this place.
Yeah, it's bad enough that we had the 70 that got it temporary, and Joshua wasn't one of the 70. Yeah. Now it's 2 other guys that weren't even part of the 70, and they're not Joshua either.
But does it say why only temporary?
Understand, in that time, the Spirit did not indwell a person like it does in salvation, where it's a permanent statute. The Spirit came and rested and then left for eternity. This is how it worked.
Okay.
Here we go. Then Moses replied, "Are you jealous for my sake?" Now, I want you to understand the nature of the question here. I don't think Moses is asking and thinking he's jealous for Moses' sake. I think Moses knows whose sake he's jealous for.
Yeah.
I wish that all of the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit on them. And then Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the camp. So he's going, this isn't about me, and it shouldn't be about you, Joshua.
Slight adjustment.
Let's have an adjustment here. The goal we have in teaching what God says is so that everyone will be doing this. And wouldn't it be great if everyone was so focused on God that they could all act as God's prophets? Yeah.
How old was Joshua at this time frame?
It says as a young man, I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the time frame to find out. Maybe in his early 20s, but I'd have to check out and see where he stands on this. But mentioning him as a young man means he's probably not past the 30 age, which tend to be the crossover into elders category for that, so he's probably earlier than that. So I'm guessing 20s, possibly. early 20s.
But you know something here, Myron, too,
Yes.
it doesn't, the Spirit doesn't have to explain himself as to why he wants to remain with two others longer than the rest.
Joshua felt it did.
Yeah.
God owes me an explanation on this one. I got this special status. What's God doing wheedling in on my territory? And this is the attitude that is carrying through.
I wish it was on everybody. Too bad you're in the 73rd, maybe.
Yeah. You don't get to be on any of these.
Ouch.
All of this is in contrast, and I want you to understand, now Paul is going to be very confrontive here. We're going to read this passage in a minute, I promise you. And the whole thing is coming down to this. He's made this contrast by saying, first off, you didn't understand the character of the men you claim to associate with. And what was the character of the men they claim to associate with? We've been looking at this deeply. What did Paul say was the foundational character trait for a man of God? Humility. Humility. Remember, he gave this whole thing about the attitudes that are supposed to go on there. And is that a character trait that you tend to notice in people called by God? You think there's some consistency to that humility thing? Moses is called. What was Moses' response when God first said, you need to lead the people?
No.
Can't do that.
I can't do that. I'm a lousy speaker. You know, I tell you.
In case you didn't know any reasons, let me just give you some.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, God says you missed the basic reasons why I shouldn't ask you. We'll work on that. That was one. Gideon. Gideon is going to lead for victory. What was Gideon's problem?
My army's too small, I can't do
I'm the least of the least tribe.
that. Oh, yeah.
I'm not of the least tribe, but I'm the least of the least tribe. What are you asking me for? I have nothing to do with the kingly line. I don't belong at the top. I don't go here. John the Baptist made an interesting comment. He said, it's the one who comes after me who's what? Sandals I am unfit to untie. Now, what's he referring to there? What's the image he's giving? Remember this? Yeah, the lowest slave. Remember, because when Jesus said, I'm going to wash your feet, Peter said, no, I'll have none of this. Why? Because no one should be that low, certainly not the Lord. And here's what John is saying. I'm not only that low, I'm too low to be that low. I'm so low, I don't come to low. I shouldn't even be a foot washer. I don't belong in this category. These are the attitudes we see again and again of the men of God. Paul made this comment to the Ephesian elders in Acts chapter 20. You know the manner of my ministry among you, serving the Lord with humility of mind. Humility of mind. It wasn't about me. There's an attitude. It wasn't just a one-time thing. Paul said, that's how I always viewed it. A humility of mind. And the Corinthians are living in their pride. You remember how low Paul took this in the last 5 verses? The example he gave, how far down the rung did the apostles and the leaders of God see themselves? Remember the words he used to describe himself? We've seen 3 basically. He said, I was a busboy. That was earlier, chapter 3. I was a busboy, a waiter. But in chapter 4, verses 1 to 5, he used a different word entirely. Remember what it was?
The galley slave.
A third level galley slave. Huperetes, if you're looking for the Greek in there. A third level galley slave. Remember what that position was? It was a death sentence. It was the lowest thing. You put people there you didn't care about, especially in the third level, because the filth and the thing, that you weren't living long there. The best thing he said so far, he goes, I'm either a busboy, a third level galley slave, but he said, I might rise to the status of a steward. Remember what a steward was?
Manager.
Is a manager to take care of something that belongs to somebody else. So he goes, that's the most prominent role I can give myself in all this, but the biggest thing I see in myself is the guy chained to the oar. My job, row. This is your oar, row. Do this. You're not asked where the ship is going. You're not asked of the design. You don't get to ask for a different position. Quit reaching up to put your hand on the tiller and row. That's the level of humility he's talking about here. That's perspective he's trying to give across. And now I want to read this section. Here's Paul having set this up. Now starting here in verse 6, he's going to start to talk about and make a comparison to this. Now, brothers, I have applied these things to myself and the apostles for your benefit. Get that? I'm making this example because this attitude is what you're supposed to have. So that you may learn from us the meaning of the saying, do not go beyond what is written. Then you will not take pride in one man over against another, for who makes you different from anyone else? What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you did not? Already, now I want you to understand, this is definitely not Paul saying what is true. This is sarcasm in the extreme. Look what he says. Already you have all you want. Already you have become rich. You have become kings, and that without us. Are you guys impressive or what? How I wish you really were or had become kings so that we might be kings with you. Basically says you've blown right past us and gone to the millennial kingdom. I wished that was true because we'd love to be there too. It'd be nice if we really had been glorified. For it seems to me that God has put his apostles on display at the end of the procession, like men condemned to die in the arena. We've been made a spectacle to the whole universe, to angels as well as to men. We are fools for Christ, but you are so wise in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. We are honored, you are honored, we are dishonored. To this very hour, we go hungry and thirsty. We're in rags. We are brutally treated. We are homeless. We work hard with our own hands. When we are cursed, we bless. When we are persecuted, we endure it. When we are slandered, we answered kindly. Up to this moment, we have become the scum of the earth and the refuse of the world. Now, I want you to understand where he's going. Let me give you an insight into this. Paul is saying, if you really claim to follow us, if you're claiming you're a follower of Paul, you're a follower of Peter, you're a follower of Apollos, do you even know what that really looks like? Do you understand what we endure? Do you understand the character we have to show? Do you understand the stature we have in the world? Because if you claim to follow us, this is what you should be willing to be. And I get the impression you're not really willing to go here.
Myron is like
Yes.
a membership versus a ministry. Like they're a member of a club versus a ministry serving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now I want to start here in verse 6. And therefore he puts this one. Now, brothers, I have applied these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, that you may learn the meaning of the saying, do not go beyond what is written. Now that's an interesting opening here. What is Paul referring to? What is Paul going after? What does he mean, don't go beyond what is written? Think this through. See if you can come up with a solution to that. What is he talking about? Don't go beyond what is written. What is he referring to?
Don't elevate yourself above the Word of God.
There you go. The Word of God has some very specific things to say about men and character, and you shouldn't go beyond that. You need to look at that and what does Scripture say about these things. And we just looked at that. Some of the Old Testament patriarchs that they looked to always had a humble attitude before they could speak. Don't go beyond what is written. Don't take an attitude different from theirs. We have some New Testament things that talk about these very same ideas. There are things you need to do. But he has set this first standard. The first thing you should not go beyond is humility. If you're not founding your life on this, you've missed the beginning point and nothing else will work. You have to do what God says, and you can only be obedient if you're humble. You understand that? Obedience comes from humility. Why is it that we always push against authority? Right. Obviously, someone else should be in charge, and I have a candidate. Me. We always come back to that. Someone else should be in charge that understands me and my needs and what I'd like to do, and I think I know that better than anyone else. This is the attitude we come at this thing. It has to be about me. I want to read you something. A number of years ago, there were a series of pastors of super churches that were interviewed. Dr. MacArthur was among them. Some other men were asked about how they built their great churches. And this was from Christianity Today magazine, and it's quoted here in Dr. MacArthur's commentary. I won't give you a name here. I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, but this is a well-known pastor, and if you looked it up, you would know this guy from being one of the mega churches in our country at a time, some years back. But he said, here's how it changed, and here's how he got a dynamic ministry. I cited that the pulpit would no longer be a teaching platform, but an instrument of spiritual therapy. I no longer preach sermons. I create experiences. I don't have time to write a systematic theology to give solid theological basis for what I intuitively know.
Wow.
Because I'm like God.
Do you understand this? I don't have time for theology because I just know. What I intuitively believe is right. Every sermon has to begin with the heart. If you ever hear me preaching a sermon against adultery, you know what my problem is. If you ever hear me preaching a sermon about the coming of Christ, you'll know that's what I am heart-wise. This is where I am now, heart-wise, he says. It so happens I'm not hung up on either one of those areas. Now, I don't know about you, but there's a certain statement that says being hung up on the return of Christ is kind of a definition of who we are. But he's not hung up on that. I could not print in public, or to deny that I could not print or in public deny the virgin birth of Christ, or the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, or the return of Christ. But when I have something I can't comprehend, I just don't deal with it.
Because I already know it all.
That's pretty strong.
This is a guy
Step
who has
away
taken
from
his
the
hands
light.
off the oar. He does not want to row. He wants his hand on the tiller. He wants to direct the ship. Now, I want you to understand something here. There is a certain level of skill sets that help a person teach and be a more effective communicator. Rowing. I looked into this in the third letter, Galley Slave, and there were things that you learn to do as a rower to try to ease the pain and get better at it so that you could last longer. One of the things that they learned was how to throw more power into it, because becoming a good rower would get you a little better food and a little better treatment. And there's ways to place your feet and get your back and not just use your arms, but use your whole body and row. So there were skill sets. They learned to do this. They would take the grease off their food and smear it over the oar, or if they could, into a cloth and wrap that around, because that would keep you from chafing and destroying your hands on the oar. There are things you can do to be a better rower. Are there skill sets to make you a better teacher or a better preacher? We've talked about some of those. There's learning how to study the text, how to approach it, context, historical context. There are skill sets. Are there ways to learn to structure your material so it's easier to follow, so people can get more out of it? All those are true, but the one thing that does not change for the rower is, no matter what he does, he still rows. And for the preacher, no matter what the skill sets you've learned to get better at it, what you do is still teach what the text says. And when you leave that, you've left the point. Paul is trying to get to this whole thing to make them understand what is said about these men. What is it they're missing here? James 3:1 this says, "Stop being so many teachers, for theirs is a greater condemnation." Now, first I say you want to venerate somebody, but you understand here that God is taking a real hard look at whoever teaches. And what they are setting themselves up for is one, not your praise, but God's condemnation if they don't get it right. There's a problem here. Now that seems to go against, we just had this thing where Paul says, why are you dividing when God has blessed you with a multitude of teachers? And now he says, don't get too many teachers. The balance comes to this. God would love it, as Moses said, if they were all able to teach. But since he knows all aren't going to be, the ones that do had better take it seriously. Now we're blessed here with a multitude of men who can teach well. But it all comes down to getting it right. How do we honor leaders in Scripture? Are there guidelines? Are there some things that tell us how we should approach the man of God and how we're supposed to treat him? 1 Thessalonians 5. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 12, if I'm not mistaken here. Yeah. Now we ask you, brothers, to respect those who do something. Now here it is. You're going to respect someone. Respect those who work hard among you, who are over you in the Lord, and who admonish you. Hold them in the highest regard and love because of their tremendous talent and huge personalities.
That's not in mine.
Different translation. Because of their work. Live in peace with each other, and we urge you, brothers, to warn those who are idle, encourage. He goes, be patient. But you're supposed to hold them in high regard for what reasons? Because of their booming voice? Because they're taller and better looking like Saul than anybody else? What is it you're looking for that says, I hold this person in high esteem? They work hard at what? The truth. They work hard at this. They actually make an effort. They lead well and they do well by holding to what is true. You should know this in 13:17 in Hebrews 13:17. It says to obey those who are over you. Elders love to quote that one. We love to bring that up every time you get out. Well, you know what you're supposed to do. Are there any standards, do you think, that should be attached to that, however? You're supposed to follow your leaders. Are there any conditions attached to doing that? Or is it just, I had a group of elders at a church I had contact with that were really upset with their congregation. They said this, we're the elders here. If we tell everybody to wear red socks, they all should wear red socks.
According to scripture.
Yeah. I couldn't find that passage. And here's the point. Paul said this, follow me as I follow Christ. In other words, if I stop rowing, stop following. When I take my hands off the oar and I decide I'm in charge, I have ceased to be a leader. The conditions are always that. 1 Timothy 5:17 talks about double honor for our leaders. Let's take a look at that one, because that's an interesting one.
1 Timothy 5.
1 Timothy 5, verse 17. Here it goes. The elders who direct the affairs of the church are worthy of double honor. Wow. Now I want you to understand the context here. It's actually talking about financial. They're worthy of being paid. I want you to hold on to that because it's going to play into what Paul's going to say here in a little bit. The elders who direct the affairs of the church are worthy of double honor, especially those who work is preaching and teaching. Or mine says who work hard at, is how the Greek should read, who work hard at preaching and teaching. For the scripture says, do not muzzle the ox while it is treading out the grain, and the worker deserves his wages. There's the context for pay. Okay, it says that you should be willing to take care of the needs, to pay reasonably, to provide honor for, by what conditions? What are you looking for? That they deserve it.
They work hard at preaching and teaching.
Okay, the ones that are sharp at handling the affairs of the church, so they ought to be smart about doing things like that, and especially those who preach, and they work hard at. How do you know someone's worked hard at preaching or teaching? What would you need to see to get an idea that they spent some time with this?
They were accurate.
They're accurate. They actually got it right. They dug in and got things, and it becomes obvious. Excellence doesn't happen in a vacuum. Coach, you know that, right? It takes a little effort to get good at something. No matter how much physical talent you have, it takes some effort to get good at something. Some people are just better with their voice, better orators, but it takes skill to get it right. All of these things come down to this, and he's setting this tone. There must be limits on our self-esteem. You might remember this from Romans 12:3. No one should think more highly of themselves than they ought. Take a special... Do you think there's anything harder than taking an honest evaluation of yourself? Isn't that hard? We go in one of two areas. Either we build ourselves up, or we ridiculously tear ourselves down and don't recognize what God has put there, that there are some things of worth and value in service.
We're still thinking about ourselves.
And that's a hard one, to be honest about ourselves. It is a hard one to do that. Paul had some interesting back and forths. From 1 Corinthians chapter 15, I believe, he makes a statement, says, I work harder than all the other apostles.
Oh, yeah.
Whoa. That's a rather arrogant statement there, Paul. That's in verse 10, I believe, but unless you read verse 9, that says, I'm working harder than anybody else because I have a lot more to make up for. I don't even deserve this position. I have more to prove than anybody else. So it started in humility, that his work, and he, as honest as simple, yes, I'm definitely doing more than the average apostle out there, but it isn't something that I take credit for. And as a matter of fact, it comes from the fact that I have no credit. An honest assessment of yourself. But notice what he says here. Here's what Paul is building to. If you get this right, back in verse 6, we will get past verse 6 before the day is over. You may learn from us, do not go beyond what is written, then you will not take pride in one man over and against another. You see, if you get this understanding, you wouldn't do this. You wouldn't make this assessment where you take one person and build them up over things. And now he's going to go after them. He's going to say, now here's the real core of the problem. If you got this right, if you understood it, he's going to ask for what makes you different from anyone else? I want you to understand how this, I really think this should read. Diakrino in the Greek means to see oneself as superior. Basically, he's saying this. What makes you better than everybody else? What makes you better than everybody else? There's a pointed question from you. Why are you so hot on yourself? Who made you king? Who put you in this position? What makes you think you're... Here's the next question. What do you have that you did not receive? Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Both in the physical realm and the spiritual, how much control did you have over what you got as natural gifting in the world? Anybody here get a survey to find out which parents you wanted to be born into, which household you got? I want the really good-looking ones with the high intelligence, and extra income wouldn't hurt. You know, we don't get to choose that. We don't get to choose to make sure that our parents were the sharp ones, that our parents were the intelligent ones, that our parents were the good-looking ones. We didn't get any of that. So he's saying, you know, natural gifting, you didn't have anything to say about that. You know, some of us were born with a voice. June, I believe that is your name.
Sorry, Daddy.
That'll teach you to miss class for a week or so. You're just gone off the roll, right? Some of us you got a voice. Some of the rest of us, like me, croak like a frog. It's just life, okay? It is what it is. That's how it works. And how much did you have to say about that? Now, how much does that apply in the spiritual realm? I love this one from 1 Corinthians chapter 12. It says that the Spirit gave gift each one as he willed. How much say did you get in what God chose for you in ministry in this church? 0. He decided what he wanted to do. That was part of the problem. They decided which gifts they were going to have, and they decided to produce them even if God hadn't really given them to them. And we're going to see that as we get into the gifts thing. But the whole idea is this. God put you in a position. He assigned your oar. You didn't get to ask. I'd rather be on level 1, left side, better view of the ship. No, you didn't get that. You didn't get that. So he puts this through. And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you did not? Here he goes. You know you didn't get anything physical. You know you didn't get spiritually other than what God gave you. So why are you bragging as if you had something to do with it? Why are you impressed with yourself? Why are you determined that we have to recognize you as being something else? Why are you acting like this? And then he launches this. Here it comes. Paul has lost it with him here. Already you have all you want. Already you have become rich. You have become kings, and that without us. Here he's going. You claiming to follow these people, you don't follow their character, you don't follow their teaching. As a matter of fact, you are so impressed with yourself, quite frankly, the way you talk, we should be following you. The apostles ought to be lining up with you because you've arrived. Look at you. I'm impressed. And that without us. And then he goes, I wish you really had become kings so we might be kings with you. He's saying that level of ability is only for a time when God has glorified his church. So I wish you really were there because that means that Christ has returned and I'm done with this world. But that's not the reality. That's not how it works. This is a little different than the other things you see in Matthew 5:6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Or Philippians 3:12. Not that I have obtained it, but I press for the mark, the prize, the high calling God, Christ in God. You know, There's a difference in attitude, isn't there? I have not gotten there, and these guys believe they have arrived. We said that that's what we started with, and that's where I was going to insert this. This whole attitude of humanity is an attitude of we have arrived at a level higher than anyone else, and every culture has that attitude. And this whole thing of woke right now, this whole thing of attitude, comes from a sense of superiority. That was in Paul's day and is certainly in ours. And we associate with things. Understand, we always associate with things or with people that elevate us. I will tell you this, the vast majority of people out there who are so passionate about these causes that they're willing to destroy whole cities and all, it isn't because they really care so much about the cause as the fact of associating with the cause makes them appear to be a more moral person than anyone else. We choose things to elevate ourselves without even understanding at the time. And that certainly is clear as you look at all this thing that's gone on in the last several years of all these movements are finding children to be the spokesman for them. You think the child really understands the issue enough to be the spokesman for a movement? So why are they willing to do that? Because it elevates them. I mean, we had a little girl address the UN and chastise them. She was the darling of the media. I love what they say after that. When people do this, when they get these kids, these other people, they say, wasn't that brave? I'm sorry. Brave was throwing yourself in front of German machine guns on Omaha Beach, not throwing yourself in front of a microphone before an adoring crowd. There's a difference. When you know that the overwhelming response is going to praise you for every word you say, when you're going to be the darling of every media broadcast, that's not brave.
Get invited to the White House.
Get invited to the White House. It's a little, that's brave. This is courage. These are profiles in courage. One reporter said we have a new greatest American generation, talking about these children doing this. No, really? The generation that went through the Great Depression and World War II, that went and fought overseas and came home having obtained no wealth, no new holdings, nothing. This is the same thing? Come on.
When I became an adult, I put away childish things.
We don't become adults anymore. Childish things are now the standard.
Is there a verse, proverb about being ruled by children?
Find it. I would love to look into that. It's interesting.
The Killing Fields movie was
Bad deal.
about that.
Now, here's it goes. I think you may be right. There is one that talks about this. Here, there's a thing here. Now, look what he says. You claim to follow us. You claim to be our disciples. Disciple means to follow in the pattern of someone. Now he's saying this. If you really were our disciples, obviously you wouldn't have this elevated view of yourself, because here's where we sit in the world. And here Paul is going to use an illustration that was rather well known in the Roman world. There's an event called the Triumph. When a general had a great victory, had achieved something great for Rome, they were entitled to a triumph, a parade in the city of Rome itself. And it would begin and move its way and end at the seat of the Senate, where he'd be taken before the Senate and receive his accolades and the laurel wreath for his victories and so forth. And the Triumph Parade was started by a chariot, usually drawn by white horses. It was adorned in gold. The general would be placed up there in his white outfit trimmed in gold, and they would be beginning of the Triumph Parade. And the next would come a group of his soldiers. They tried to avoid having the whole army in there because they were worried about a general taking over Rome if they let his whole army in. But there'd be soldiers there, and they'd be guarding piles of loot taken in the event of the victory. At the very end of the parade were brought prisoners that were captured in the course of combat, often generals or the king of the vanquished nation. And these guys we brought in last in chains, and they would be paraded down to the arena, later the Colosseum when that was built, and there they would be either ceremonially killed in the most gruesome kind of ways, or forced to fight gladiators or wild animals, and they would die. This is the setting. Now, notice where Paul puts the apostles. For it seems to me that God has put us apostles on display at the end of the procession, like men condemned to die in the arena. We have been made a spectacle to the whole universe, to angels as well as to men. Paul didn't put himself in the chariot. He didn't even get to be one of the soldiers guarding the loot. Where does Paul put himself and the apostles? The end, the condemned men. He's saying, if you're really our disciples, you need to be prepared to take the world's scorn, because in all honesty, that's what being a Christian is going to get you. Do you understand that the only way the world is going to adore you is if you say what the world wants, and that will compel you to compromise on your faith? You have to. You have to. Notice how he goes through this. We made a spectacle. We are fools for Christ, but you are so wise in Christ. You understand the contrast there? We're fools because we stand by what is true. How could they be consigned as wise in Christ before the world? What would they have to do to gain that title? Alter it somewhere. Compromise somewhere. I want you to understand, this church went so far to compromise to gain the world's accolades that they actually started assigning things and praising things that even the world found disgusting. I mean, can you imagine going so far that our culture would find something we did disgusting? That there would be some immorality in the world we would embrace. In their case, we're talking about incest in the family. Even the world said that's far for us. We are fools for God. You are so wise in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. You are honored, and we are dishonored. Here's the challenge. If you're our followers, why aren't you getting any of this in your life? If this is your standard, what's going on? To this very hour, we go hungry and thirsty. We are in rags. We are brutally treated, and we are homeless. We work hard with our own hands. Now, I want you to stop here. They claim to be honoring Paul, Peter, and Apollos. And Paul is saying, here's my condition. I have a hard time getting good clothing, place to sleep. I have to work a full-time job so I can do full-time ministry. If they really honored Peter and Paul and others, wouldn't their condition have been a little different? If it was really about how much and how highly they regarded Paul, how is it he has to live like this to serve them?
And he always chose to have all the money brought in, sent to other people.
Sent to
He
other
wouldn't
people.
know, he says, I'm not taking anything from you.
It is crazy. In fact, he goes, I work hard because I don't want you to have to.
Right.
But here's making a plain. You don't even try. It isn't like I turned down your gift. You claim I'm your guy, and no one's offered me a thing to change the condition of my life. This is how you honor leaders? This is supposedly the great, you just adore me? Having a hard time seeing that. And I think you work with your hands. Understand, in their culture, this was the lowest thing you could do. To know you had arrived is when you were smart enough and capable enough to hire our own slaves to do that stuff, and you just directed things. I remember in high school, I started dating a girl at that time. I was still working full-time because of the condition of my family. But her father had a talk with her about a bad idea because he said, you know what, that guy's never going to be anything but a tool user.
Oh,
And what he meant by that, he's going to work with his hands. You don't want to be with that. But that attitude was in their culture. That's beneath us. And Paul says, I'm supposed to be your most venerated leader, and I have to work like a common person. What? Something's not matching up here. When we are cursed, we bless. Now here's contrasting character. Does a prideful person handle that? What's our response when somebody says something we think is completely uncalled for?
How dare you?
Yeah, we're going to get indignant. We're going back. As a matter of fact, if we're very clever, we come up with a better put down than they have. That's what we're looking for. Can we be smarter? When we are persecuted, we endure it. No, I'm not enduring. I'm making somebody pay for that. Here you go. When we are slandered, we answer kindly. Up to this moment, we've become the scum of the earth and the refuse of the world. Here is again a description of himself and how they stand in the world's stature. Scum of the earth, refuse of the world. The images, this phrase was used in a number of things. When you get done with a meal, the stuff that's left over, the old stuff on the plates that has to be scraped off, or the cooking utensils, that's what he's referring to. Boat people use this, the shipbuilders stuff, that a ship that had to be pulled out of the ocean periodically because barnacles and seaweed and scum would come up and stick to the bottom, would eventually destroy the ship, slow it down, cause problems. Periodically, you had to take and scrape all that off. Anything there you kept for later, this is worth having. That's not the image. You didn't do that. It's the stuff that nobody wants. It's so bad you have to throw it away. And he says, this is how we're viewed. And his challenge to them is, I don't think any of you are humble enough to think that you could possibly live like that. With all your claims about your dedication, you are such a good Christian, and you have such a great Christian leader that you stay with. Do you even understand what we're talking about here? And there is sarcasm ends, and that's where we're going to close today. Ryan, you want to hop up over here and shut this down? Questions or comments as we close this out? Does somebody have to get back?
You know,